With the Holosun Iris finally here in real life, now everyone online is probably waiting for me to roast it like I did the Holosun DRS. But before we can truly evaluate the Holosun Iris laser aiming module, or LAM for short, we must first understand the wider market of LAMs available to civilians. How do we know if the Iris sucks if we don't consider all of the other options? What's a LAM? A LAM is a laser pointer that connects to a firearm such that the user can aim at and/or illuminate targets, generally using an infrared light that is invisible to the naked eye. While many LAMs do have a visible laser setting, the only viable reason to get one is for use with night vision in tactical, police, prepared civilian, and in some hunting applications. Infrared light is invisible, so unless you're wearing night vision, you can't see it. This means that if you don't have night vision, a potential enemy could be shining a LAM directly on you, and you'd never even know it. LAMs are useful for both aiming and target identification. Night vision works by amplifying light, but there are still shadows and darkness, especially at distance. So the second useful feature of a LAM is to illuminate targets so the user can see into shadows with greater detail. Infrared light being invisible to the naked eye meant that in the early GWAT era, US troops wearing night vision goggles and scopes could, quote, own the night by deploying powerful LAMs and even large IR floodlights whenever and however they wanted. Potential adversaries could see nothing and pretty much got smoked. Over the years of conflict, enemy combatants developed countermeasures to offset night vision. While most insurgents could not usually afford their own NVG, they found over time that they could modify things like GoPro cameras and phone cameras, or use night-capable security cameras to sense IR light and get an early warning that US soldiers were approaching. Anyway, in this era, military lasers like the PEC-2, the PEC-15, both the L3 ATPL and the Steiner D-Ball A2, became the gold standard for night vision performance. Since civilian LAMs were so tragically underpowered, the full-power ATPL and D-Ball A2 became highly sought after in the civilian market. Mil-spec LAMs also gained popularity by being battle-proven and for, quote, second cool to military clone builders wanting a rifle that's as close as possible to the firearms that troops deployed with. To clarify, civilians can buy a civilian version of the PEC-15, but unlike their military counterparts, these civilian legal PEC-15s are limited to civilian power, which makes them kind of pointless for the money. Are LAMs still relevant? In more recent events, such as the Ukraine conflict, soldiers on both sides seem to be buying night vision, LAMs, and thermal on places like eBay and even AliExpress. In this environment, nobody really owns the night, and night vision, a LAM, and thermal capability are almost required if you want even the chance at surviving long enough to get whacked by an FPV drone. Since potential adversaries could very well have night vision so that they're able to see your LAM, why not just go with passive aiming? Passive aiming is looking through your night vision tube and then through some sort of red dot or holographic optic such that the holographic or red dot is overlaid over the top of your night vision device, and then you can aim your rifle. While passive aiming does not create a downrange signature like using a laser aiming module, the problem is that passive aiming kind of sucks. It's slower, it's harder to identify targets, and there's a certain amount of light transmission that is degraded, making it even harder to identify targets at distance. In this scenario, someone passive aiming versus someone running a LAM, if the person with the LAM had good light discipline, they might often have an advantage over passive aiming due to the speed at which they could identify and fire upon targets. Lastly, even if you are passive aiming, you are still producing a visible muzzle flash at every shot, with or without a suppressor. This means that LAMs are still here, we just have to be more careful with them. So why do civilian LAMs suck so bad? Just about every LAM ever brought to the US civilian market has either been trash, overpriced neutered trash, or overpriced and sort of okay. The few lambs that have not been trash are either ridiculously overpriced and, okay, or decent, but huge. There's two main reasons that most lambs suck. 1. Lucrative government contracts stifle innovation as companies chase government bucks rather than the civilian market. Here's a few examples. Red dot weapon sights actually came from civilian competitive shooting because the civilian free market is driven by innovation. The M16 and the M4 rifle, similarly, were very slowly improved over the span of decades until the 1994 assault weapon ban ended in late 2004. Once firmly in civilian hands, the AR-15, along with weapons accessories, have experienced 2 decades of revolutionary improvements from private companies and garage gunsmiths. Some better than others, but the general trajectory has been fast innovation and greatly improved weapons platforms. The second reason that most civilian lambs suck is actually an interesting one. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration limits civilian lasers to 0.5 milliwatts of power. Yes, that FDA prohibits the civilian sale of IR lasers over 0.5 milliwatts of power. To be clear, I don't agree with the FDA's decision, but it is important to understand what the risks are when dealing with IR lasers. Past 0.5 milliwatts in power, an IR laser could cause permanent harm to your eyes. And as we've discussed, IR light is invisible. So if you had an IR laser aimed at your eye, you'd never know it until it was too late. Personally, I do prefer dangerous freedom, but so far, it looks like the moms of America might be winning. The easy solution for working with full-power IR lasers is muzzle discipline. If the gun is aimed in a safe direction, then so is the laser. But not so fast. Unlike a bullet, a laser beam can reflect off of glass, a mirror, or other shiny objects like a car bumper. This means that you could accidentally give yourself homebrew LASIK eye surgery by inadvertently shining your laser at a reflective surface. But more likely, you'd just blem your tubes. To be clear, a 0.5 milliwatt laser is generally powerful enough for aiming, but it is not usually powerful enough for a decent laser-based illuminator beyond 50 to 75 yards. Laser-based illuminators allow a measured amount of divergence while still being focused enough that it doesn't flood out the entire foreground like some flashlight-based illuminators such as the Rovivon GL3 Pro. This means that most civilian lambs run out of illuminator no matter how much you spend. So how has the American civilian market got around these issues? Let's start with the traditional solutions. The only legal way around is to get a zucked, underpowered lamb and suffer well. Enjoy your Holosun LS321 and don't dare look past 75 yards. Option 2 is to supplement your weak IR laser with an infrared flashlight like the Surefire Vampire Light. This solution works, but it's not ergonomic and the illumination is not laser-based, so it floods too much. But it's kind of okay. These lights give away your position to others with night vision a lot more than laser-based illuminators because the light tends to flood out more and create more of a light trail back to you. These lights also tend to light up the foreground, which casts a shadow on more distant targets and may even cause your tubes to start auto-gating. Option 3 is not exactly legal, but there's no real way to stop it either, and that is to get a military surplus and/or, let's be honest, a stolen lamb from a questionable source. This solution works, and you do get the street cred of having a legit military unit, but these are surplus and may be damaged, stolen, broken. They definitely have zero warranty, and they generally cost about $2,000. Option 4. Get a Steiner D-Ball D2. This gets you full power illumination by using an IR LED emitter that's focused into a beam, and it actually works decently well in providing useful illumination past 75 yards. But there are some downsides. The main downside of the D-Ball D2 is that it's huge.
The huge problem.
I guess you could do more push-ups to overcome the D2's exceptionally large size and weight. Steiner and the D-Ball product line is also a bit hard to understand. Longtime night vision creators like Hop seem to switch between love and hate of D-Balls all in the same video. Or maybe he's actually switching between hate and barely tolerate. I can't really tell. I ended up selling my D-Ball D2 because it was huge, and honestly, the Laserspeed M6TR was superior in every way. Although the D2's secondary illuminator ring is sort of unique, it's not at all useful. Option 5. Get a MAL C1. The MAL is as powerful as a D-Ball D2, but it has much better controls. The MAL's definitely a decent laser, but it also costs $3,500. You know, the MAL's a good-looking laser, and it is ergonomic, but it's also a little chonky, and about the same size and weight as a D2, but the layout and how the MAL is arranged is actually much better. Although, $3,500 is $3,500. All right, so those are the traditional solutions. What are the newer solutions? Now we got to talk about China.
You go over to China.
Some Chinese companies now basically seem to be ignoring the FDA laser ban, and they are willing to sell full-power lambs directly to consumers on sites like eBay and AliExpress. US-made purists will always show up in the comments saying that they only buy American, and they cite two main reasons. Number one is the principle of the matter. Support America and don't support communists. Sure, I respect this argument, but only up to a point. These idealists forget that the iPhone that they're scrolling on, the TV and the computer they're watching, are also made in China. And your quote, American pickup truck is full of Chinese-made electronics. And many American optics companies like Nightforce and EOTech do use imported glass. So at this point, how American are the Americans? I would argue that the principle of American-made died a long time ago, and it's ridiculously arbitrary to demand an American-made lamb from a company that hates you. U.S. military manufacturers have a long track record of disrespecting civilians through dishonesty and lack of product availability. Either EOTech, L3, or Steiner could make a truly legit civilian laser, or lobby the government to sell us a real laser, but they just don't. The Civ Legal EOTech OGL was promised at SHOT Show a few years ago, but to be honest, it's vaporware. And even if it is real, it would be a neutered, Civ Power waste of time and money. Steiner could put the technology of the D2 into a much smaller, more modern form factor, but they don't. U.S. military suppliers have a long history disrespecting the civilian market. Why are we carrying water for companies that don't care about us? Sure, if you want an EOTech, buy an EOTech. But also understand that EOTech, the company, has very little, if any, regard for the American civilian firearms owner. Number 2 is quality and performance. If you spend a lot of time listening to Hop's older night vision content, you've probably heard him tell you how Steiner lasers are raging piles of trash, but then he still recommends them because somehow they're the least trashy of the bunch. Other than the D-Ball D2 or the MAL C1, pretty much all US civilian lambs are weak and not really worth the money. In contrast, Chinese Laserspeeds and the new Holosun Iris both have better beam focus and clarity than a lot of military units, and are more powerful than any of the civilian units. Well, then you say, I'm going to go buy a full-power American laser through either theft or dumpster diving. Okay, fine. Gray market, military-only, US-made PEC-15 units being sold on the used market were either stolen or written off as destroyed and then taken out of the trash can. Last I checked, gray market PEC-15s go for about $2,000 on eBay, which is twice the price of an Iris or an M6TR, and these units have zero warranty. From the PEC-15s I've seen, the Iris and the M6TR both have better quality illumination than surplus PECs in terms of lack of blemishes and more uniform light. Comparing apples to apples in a blind quality test, 10 out of 10 people would pick either a Laserspeed M6TR or the Holosun Iris over a PEC-15. At this point in time, to choose an American-made lamb over a Chinese Holosun or a Chinese Laserspeed M6TR is to intentionally tie one hand behind your back by paying more money for less performance. Chinese lambs perform better than the military surplus PEC-15s I've seen, and at much better prices and with much better warranties. So let's learn more about the Chinese options. The cheap option is to get an eBay SomoGear PEC-15 airsoft laser that gives you full military laser power for under $300. The downside is that it's for airsoft and it kind of sucks, but for the money, it's also kind of awesome. I've ran them on AR-15s, AKs, some people have even ran them on SCARs, and yes, they do seem to hold zero okay. There are some downsides of the SomoGear though. Number one, the build quality seems a bit low, and it seems kind of cheap. The visible laser on the SomoGear is not perfectly slaved to the IR laser, so you really can't zero during the day and expect that zero to hold when you switch to the IR laser. The third problem I had with the SomoGear is that the laser did not stay centered in the middle of the illuminator pattern throughout its focus range. So overall, it works. It never broke on me, but there are some QC issues and the build quality seems pretty low. But it did work and it did tend to hold zero. The second for the Chinese option is Laserspeed. A few years ago, a company called Laserspeed began putting full-power laser aiming modules on eBay, selling them directly to the US consumer. These units were much better quality than the Airsoft tier SomoGears. Over the last few years, Laserspeed, their product line, has gone through 4 or 5 generations so far, with each redesign bringing improved quality and features to market. The current generation Laserspeed M6TR is more powerful, it's smaller, lighter, and more robust than the best civilian laser on the market was 5 years ago. The quality and clarity of the Laserspeed M6TR illuminator is actually better than many full-power military LAMs that I've tried. The downside is limited US distribution, meaning you can't really buy one on Optics Planet yet, but it is a full-power, laser-based illuminator that, as of the time of this recording, you can get shipped right to your house, new in box, right in the United States. Option C is the Holosun Iris. Over the years, Holosun has built a pretty good reputation for high value and decent quality. For budget pistol dots, Holosun may in some cases even be better than some of the name brand top-tier units. Holosun's previous generation LAM series was typified by the LS321, which was a reliable unit that was much more affordable than the American-made options. The only real problem with the Holosun LS321 was that it was still limited by the US government FDA regulations, so it would always be weak and ineffective past 50 to 75 yards.
Alright, what's up, haters?
And this is really where Laserspeed came into the market. Laserspeed, along with SomoGear, began selling full military power LAMs to US civilians by simply ignoring the FDA regulations. Laserspeed had some problems with their early units, but they quickly improved and repeatedly came out with upgraded designs. Laserspeed introduced units like the FL5, the M3, the M6, and finally, the newest versions of the M6TR. Laserspeed's M6TR resulted in a unit that offered full military power, that was smaller, lighter, and had much better performance than Holosun's anemic LS321. I believe this pressure from competitors like Laserspeed and SomoGear finally pushed Holosun to produce the Iris. The Iris uses V-cell technology similar to that found in the MAL C1 to produce illumination levels on par with military lasers, while still being technically civilian legal. Although American-made laser aiming modules has been a pretty dark topic so far, I would like to give somewhat of an honorable mention to a few small US companies. The US Night Vision DIRV and the laser formerly known as Phantom Hill, CTF Photonics, with their newest CTF3 laser. These seem to be decent units. I don't know, in a world where I can get Laserspeeds and Holosun Iris, I don't know if I'm going out of my way to get one, but I would actually appreciate the opportunity to check one of these out in greater detail. I had been waiting for one of the previous Phantom Hill CTF2s, but I had tried to get them for a few years, and my desperate pleas went nowhere, so I ended up getting an entire case of Laserspeed M6TRs. Even still, if someone sent me one, I would actually like to get my hands on a DIRV or the new CTF3, and I'd offer them fair reviews. With these other options on the market from Holosun and Laserspeed, I don't know if I'm going out of my way to pay cash for one to get one on the channel, though. Closing. The competition between Chinese companies like Laserspeed, Holosun, and SomoGear have resulted in a US civilian laser aiming module market that has been a revolution in terms of increased quality, affordability, and just plain options. A few years ago, the only ways to get a full power laser was to either A, spend $3,500 on a mall, B, spend $1,500 and get a Gigantor D-Ball D2, C, spend $2,000 on a surplus/stolen/damaged military PEC 15, or D, cope and seethe with an inadequate power LAM. In contrast, today we now find ourselves in a pretty good spot where we now have multiple laser boxes of reasonable quality and reliability that offer full power performance for at or near $1,000. Whether you choose the Laserspeed M6TR or the Holosun Iris, or you really want to be cheap and get a SomoGear, today you'll be able to get a much better laser for a much better price than would have been possible even a few years ago. In some kind of weird plot twist, communist Chinese companies have out-free marketed us Americans. The proverbial ship has already sailed, and as of right now, Chinese laser boxes might already be higher performing and more reliable than the American-made options at any price. This may be the tipping point where you either get a Chinese lamb or you fall behind. Proverbs 27:1. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Thank you.